Thank you for being here. It's what a blessing, really, when you are able to look across the room and to know that there is someone right there that is striving side by side with you to get to heaven. What a blessing it is. Thank you for being here. This passage is one of my favorite passages in 1 Corinthians, but really it's one of my favorite passages in chapter 9, and I was originally intending to skip it, but I decided not to, because this month in August we were planning on starting a different idea and moving into 1 Corinthians chapter 10 and chapter 11, but for this Sunday, we're going to stick in chapter 9 and finish up with this lesson because I think this passage is one that is worth looking at, especially if you remember our theme for last month is others. Others matter. And this is really a summation, in my opinion, a summation of chapter 8 and chapter 9. Paul, in this passage, he says, I've become all things to all people. What a powerful statement. What a powerful statement. It's something that I believe that we should all strive to achieve. Thinking about this, we're going to look at beginning in verse 19, and we're going to move through the rest of the chapter methodically, looking at how Paul divulges and arrives at this conclusion. If you remember in chapter 8, he's talking about meat offered to idols. And the meat offered to idols, we understand that there is no such thing as a God, little g. But there is only one big G, God. So if you eat meat that's been offered to an idol, what is it? It's really nothing. And Paul says, but even though I know that there is no other God, I still, if it hurts my brother's conscience, I'm not going to eat meat at all. So he puts other people in front of himself. And carrying that same idea into chapter 9, if you remember from a few weeks ago, he talks about preachers and money. Yeah, it was weird. But we went there. And he says, I have given up my right for the sake of you. I've given up my right to be paid for you. So continuing with that thought, we arrive at verse 19 through the rest of the chapter. And he says, I have become all things to all people. And it's all based on how he considers other people more significant than himself. He begins with the preferences of other people. Read with me, verse 19 through verse 21. For though I am free from all, I have made myself a servant to all, that I might win more of them. To the Jews I became a Jew in order to win the Jews. To those under the law I became as one under the law, though not being myself under the law, that I might win those under the law. To those outside the law I became as one outside the law, not being outside the law of God, but under the law of Christ, that I might win those outside the law. We understand that there was this tension because there have been people for centuries who have been following the old law, right? They have been trying to the very best of their ability to keep the law of God down to the letter. And now all of a sudden Jesus comes and he says, I've come to fulfill the law, right? The law and the prophets. But there is still this inward struggle with these Jews who were trying to balance keeping the old law and those traditions with the law of Christ and the law of grace. The struggle. So he says that I've become all things to all people, all to all. Now what Paul is not saying, let me be very clear. Because you could take it in a totally different direction of something that Paul is not saying. He is not saying that I have camouflaged myself so that I can blend in with whoever is around me. I have become, with the drunks, I have become a drunk. With those who are addicted to anything else, I have become like them. To those who are living a scandalous life, I have become scandalous myself so that I might win the scandalous. I know people, and I'm sure that you do, that have, I believe sincerely, that have insisted that we need to go down and we need to sit in the bars and conduct a worship service so that we might win those who are struggling with alcohol. That's not what Paul is saying. All the things that Paul is talking about are not sinful things. Paul is not saying that you need to embrace sin, a sinful lifestyle, so that somehow, some way, you can win the sinner. No. He's not saying, and nor would he ever endorse, being camouflaged into the world so that you can win the world. The only opinion, what he's saying, if I could be so bold as to say, what he's saying is the only opinion that matters is God's. Whether you embrace traditions or not, the only opinion that matters is God. So I'm going to do away with my opinion and my preference so that I can win someone else. Because quite frankly, my opinion, let's go back to chapter 8 and chapter 9, my opinion doesn't matter. What's more important is the soul of the brother or sister that I'm trying to win. That's what matters. God's opinion is the only one that's going to stand on Judgment Day. What I prefer and what you prefer, believe it or not, it's not going to stand on Judgment Day. I prefer to preach at the beginning of a sermon, at the beginning of what's this called? Worship service. Or I prefer to take the Lord's Supper at the very end. Or I prefer that we take down the paneling and rip up the blue carpet. I'm just kidding. It doesn't matter. You know, all of our opinions, at the end of the day, they mean nothing. The only thing that's going to stand is the Word of God. So why would we squabble over opinions? God made very clear from the very beginning that his opinion is going to stand. You remember there are two brothers that were born to Adam and Eve, actually several, but Cain and Abel. God had an opinion about the way that they should sacrifice, a way that they should worship him. Remember, Cain, he had no regard for his sacrifice. Abel, he did accept his sacrifice, and as a subsequent consequence, Cain killed Abel. Or you go back and we travel forward several hundred years. And we arrive in Leviticus chapter 10. We arrive at the story of Nadab and Abihu. And God makes it very clear again that his opinion is what matters. Because Nadab and Abihu, right, they were authorized to lead in the, if we could make it broad enough, they were authorized to lead in the worship service. But they didn't do it in the right way. They offered and perhaps got fire from a different place than the way that God prescribed them to. And guess what? God made it abundantly clear that that was not okay. They died. God's opinion is what matters. It doesn't matter what you want or what you think. The only thing that will stand when we see God is this. So Paul, again, he says, I become all things to all people because my opinion doesn't matter. He continues, if you'll allow me, in the verses that Scott just read for us in 22 and 23, and he talks about how people are the priority, right? Because it's not about It's not about opinions. The focus is on the people. Let's read it again. To the weak, he says, I became weak that I might win the weak. I have become all things to all people, that by all means I might save some. I do it all for the sake of the gospel, that I may share with them in its blessings. Powerful. Man, that's powerful. If you're reading this, and every time I read verse 22, I think it ought to read this way. To the weak I became weak, that I might win the weak. I have become all things to all people, that by all means I might save all. Right? Because you want him to continue and say, I want to save all, or to save all people. But that's not what he says, is it? That by all means I might save some. You see, we need a reality check on two ends of the spectrum. We need a reality check because Paul says that I might save some so that I can share in its blessings, the blessings of the gospel. So reality check number one. Do you believe that the gospel and the Christian life has blessings? Because if the Christian life, if following God has blessings, then why on earth would I ever keep it to myself? Why am I not screaming it from the rooftops that the life of a Christian is the best life and there's no other way to live? If I believe it. Do you believe that what Jesus says in John chapter 10 and verse 10, I came that they may have life. Remember, he's the good shepherd. I came that they may have life and have it abundantly. Do you believe that Jesus offers an abundant life, that this is absolutely, without a doubt, the best life that you can live? Do you believe that? Or do you believe that there is, when you follow God, a peace that doesn't make sense to the world? A peace that surpasses understanding? Do you believe that when you follow God and when you face death that you can be at peace and that you can welcome, as we just sang, on Jordan's stormy banks I stand and cast a wishful eye, right? We can stand on the brink of death and long to die. Do you believe that? That we have a peace that surpasses understanding? Or do you truly believe that when we follow God, that when we are Christians, that there is a joy, as it tells us, a joy that is inexpressible? That the Christian can live a life of tragedy with a smile on his face. Do you believe that? That a Christian can lose a loved one and smile about it. Or that a Christian can face that big, ugly C word, cancer, and smile. That there is a joy that is absolutely inexpressible. Or that someone, the Christian, can lose their job and be destitute and still rejoice. Because if we believe the blessings of the Christian life, then why aren't we sharing them? How could we not share them? Every time we see someone in the valley, talk to them about the Christian life. Talk to them about the hope, as Paul tells us in Romans chapter 5, that there's a hope that will never put us to shame. That's a reality check. That if we truly believe that the Christian life is a life of blessings, then goodness gracious, we need to talk about it. We need to share it. I have become all things to all people so that by all means I might save some, so that they can share in the blessings. Man. Let's do another reality check. Let's go to the other end of the spectrum. On this end of the spectrum, there are some people that share the gospel everywhere they go, and that they talk to people. They befriend people just for the sole purpose of sharing with them what Jesus has done for them. That's their only intention in life, is to go to heaven and to take as many people with them as possible. That's what they want. Reality check. Remember what Paul says. Go back to it in verse 22. That by all means I might save some. Not everyone that you encounter will receive the gospel. It's just a plain fact of the matter. Not everyone that you talk to about Jesus and you talk to about being baptized is going to do it. It's just reality. And if Paul isn't able to save everybody that he encounters, then why would I ever think that I could? That by all means I might save some. You remember, let's go back just a couple of pages, okay? 1 Corinthians chapter 1 and verse 17, you remember what Paul says there. Look at why Paul came. Look at what Paul's intention was to do. He says, "For Christ did not send me to baptize, but to preach the gospel. And not with words of eloquent wisdom, lest the cross of Christ be emptied of its power." Paul said, I did not come for the intention to baptize everybody, to save everybody that I encountered. I came to preach the gospel and to share the gospel. Other than that, there is nothing that I can do. He says it this way. If you move over a couple of chapters, I planted, Apollos watered, but God gave the growth. We do what we can and we leave the rest up to God. Let's go back and let's continue in this journey through chapter 9, 19 through 27, and continue into verse 24. But do you not know that in a race all runners run, but only one receives the prize? So run that you may obtain it. Every athlete, in verse 25, every athlete exercises self-control in all things. They do it to receive a perishable wreath, but we an imperishable. There is a prize. There is a prize that we are trying to obtain. This prize, Paul describes it as an imperishable wreath. The image is that of an athletic contest in which the winner of this athletic contest would have not a trophy. They would have a wreath put on them. You know what this wreath is made out of, right? A tree limb. So you exert all your energy and you do everything possible and you get a tree limb. Way to go. It seems a little silly, doesn't it? Almost as silly as giving everybody a trophy that participated. These people were striving with all of their energy to obtain something that's going to perish. But the prize of a Christian is a prize that will never perish. As soon as you take that tree limb off its tree, guess what it does? It dies. We are striving for something that's going to last forever. When I read verse 24 and verse 25, I can't help in my mind to go to Hebrews chapter 12. You're familiar with it. We've talked about it before. He says, therefore, coming from chapter 11, therefore, since we are surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses, Let us lay aside every weight and sin which clings so closely, and let us run with endurance the race that is set before us, looking to Jesus, the founder and perfecter of our faith, who for the joy that was set before him endured the cross, despising the shame, and is seated at the right hand of the throne of God. If we run in this race, and we are running for this imperishable crown, the crown of victory, how do we run? I think this in chapter 12, Hebrews chapter 12, and verses 1 and 2, I think this tells us precisely, or at least gives us a hint at how to run. Run with, he says first, endurance. Run with endurance the race that is set before you. It's so easy. It is so easy to be discouraged, isn't it? When you plan this activity for the whole congregation and all 5 people show up, it is so easy to be discouraged, isn't it? Or when you are so excited about an event and nobody else will share your excitement. It is so easy to be discouraged, isn't it? Run with endurance. When you are weary and you are tired, run with endurance. Or maybe you've been teaching Bible class for 20 years and nobody else will volunteer to teach. Run with endurance. That's how we get this imperishable crown. First, run with endurance, the race that is set before you. And then he continues, fixing your eyes on Jesus. At least that's a translation that I grew up with. Fixing your eyes on Jesus. I believe the ESV says looking to Jesus. When you run, there are so many distractions that you could look at. So many distractions. You could look at this $65,000, and let me tell you, that's ridiculous. $65,000 truck over here that we were talking about in men's Bible study. You could look at that and you could lust after it. And you could look at this 5,000 square foot home or more, and you could lust after it. And you could look over here at this $15,000 or $30,000 brand new boat over here, and you could lust after all those things. There are so many distractions in the world. Or, easier yet, you could turn on TV. And the reason we have commercials is to get you to lust after something that you absolutely do not need. This brand new food processor. Distractions. The world is full of distractions, but we as Christians, if we want to receive this imperishable crown, let us fix our eyes on Jesus. Don't look at all the distractions. Just look at Jesus. Look at what he's done for you. You continue in this idea that we run with endurance, that we focus on Jesus. It all hinges on one central idea. You got to get rid of sin. Let us lay aside sin which so easily entangles us. You got to get rid of sin of the past, because a lot of times what we do is we come to the cross, and we come to the cross with a lot of baggage. Get rid of sin of the past. Get rid of sin of the present. Whatever you're struggling with, lay aside sin. But if you go back to 1 Corinthians chapter 9 and you look at the passage that we just got done reading, it adds one more thing in verse 25. Lay aside sin, run with endurance, look at Jesus, verse 25, and do it with self-control. You got to control yourself if you want to run the race that's set before us. Let's continue in verse 26 and verse 27 very quickly with the purpose for which all of this, the whole reason we do any of this, the whole reason we practice self-control, the whole reason we become all things to all people. Look at this in verse 26 and verse 27. So I do not run aimlessly. I do not box as one beating the air, but I discipline my body and keep it under control, lest after preaching to others, I myself should be disqualified. This is the whole reason that we do this, is for heaven. Maybe the translation, I think most translations use the word discipline there at verse 27. I discipline my body. But I believe it's the King James that uses the word buffet. Now, right before lunch, let me tell you, that is not pronounced buffet. Buffet, all right? I buffet my body daily. I discipline my body daily. Why? Why would you do this? Self-control. I want to keep myself under control so that I can obtain the prize. Because what's the point of me talking to you about Jesus and salvation if I myself can't get there? He continues and he says, I discipline my body and keep it under control, lest after preaching to others, I myself should be. Very last word in the entire chapter is disqualified. Lest I myself should be disqualified. So let's go back to this race image. We're running the race. We get down to the starting blocks. We are on our marks. And we are ready, and then we take off. Guess what? You're disqualified. Or we are running the race, and someone beside me is running really hard, and I am ahead of them just by a little bit. So what I decide to do as I'm running is step into their lane. You are disqualified. Or I am running the race and I am not wearing the appropriate attire. You are disqualified. So it is with the Christian race. Follow the rules. When you run the race, you have to follow the rules. Which brings us back to how we started. I have become all things to all people so that by all means I might win some. How are some won? How are some saved? It is through the gospel. By living according to the gospel, obeying the gospel, this is what it all boils down to. One question: are you living for God? If you're not living for God, you haven't been baptized, why not? Let me tell you, the Christian life is the best life. It's the abundant life. Or perhaps you're running the race and you are weary. You need help. The church is here to cheer you on, to give you all the encouragement that we could possibly give you. We'll leave the rest to God. If you need Him, please come as we stand and as we sing.